Walter and Attila, it is time now for the Ask Us Anything. So, all of you guys here in the live stream chat, uh, it's up to you to ask the questions now. I want to sit here and say nothing for an hour. Nothing would please me more at the moment. So, if you have anything to ask Walter or Attila, now is the time to do it. Anything at all related to D and D development. Off-topic questions, it's up to them if they want to answer them. Um, I'm ambivalent. So, before you start asking the questions, I'll give each of them a chance to say some opening remarks. Walter, take it away, please.
Oh, well, I hope you guys all enjoyed my at live controversial proposal earlier. I'm curious on since you've had an hour or two to think about it, if you got any opinions on it, and I'd like to hear it. See, other things I've been working on. I've made a push in the last couple of months to just go through the bug list and remove a whole bunch of annoying problems with the back end. Like cleaned up a lot of long-standing issues with the inline assembler, and then I went through and fixed a number of code generation bugs. Those are all just kind of housekeeping things, but having a code generation bug is really annoying because it silently doesn't work, and it's really hard to see what's wrong with your code when it's the compiler that's screwing up. So I enjoy fixing those things and getting all that stuff cleaned up. And if you have a code gen bug that isn't reported, of course, it won't ever get fixed. So please report your code gen bugs and all the other bugs to Bugzilla. And that's the only way they're going to get fixed.
Attila.
Well, I hope you enjoy my controversial talk tomorrow. Obviously, I can't ask you what you think about it yet because that hasn't happened. But yeah, I don't know if I have anything else than that. I hope you've been enjoying the talk so far, and it keeps on happening till tomorrow as well. And also looking forward to hearing some good questions, especially if they're hard, because they're also exploring.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay.
Favorite color is easy.
Yeah, make us earn it.
Well, I'm going to start with a softball to get you guys going. What do you think is the biggest pain point in D right now, in the current state of the game, with the features we have now, the things you see in the community, in the forums that people are talking about? What do you think is in your mind is the biggest pain point right now?
The biggest pain point appears to be when people scale up their use of templates, they start running into all kinds of capacity problems. And I know Stefan has worked on that with his type functions as a way to greatly improve the performance of that. And I have a PR that's sitting on GitHub right now, which allows alias reassignments in static for eaches, which also promises to fix these major performance problems when you use an awful lot of templates and when you have a lot of recursive instantiations of templates. All those cause the compiler to run very slowly, consume lots of memory, and sometimes even run out of memory. So that appears to be the largest pain point at the moment with deprogramming. And I'll be happy to get a fix or an improvement incorporated in the compiler, at least to reduce that down to the level of the other issues the language has.
Attila.
Personally, I'd like to even echo what Walter's saying, because for me, build times are the worst thing for me. Personally, in my daily usage of D, that's what's annoying me. As a whole wide community, I think convincing people of D's value and to adopt it, I think, would be the main issue. And that's obviously a hard problem to solve because it involves meat bags. So.
Have you been watching Supernatural?
No.
That's what they call when angels or demons possess them. They're meat bags. So just curious.
I see.
All right. We have a question from Matt. What's on the roadmap for D in the next year or two?
Well, probably the obvious things are the things we're talking about. And the things we're talking about are the at-live programming, fixing the template problems. Steven Schweighofer is working on some ideas for a new version of Phobos, Phobos 2, if you like, that will incorporate a lot of our more modern ideas in deprogramming, because as the language has evolved over time, the way we use the language has also evolved over time. And Phobos is a bit of the way we used to do things in D. And doing a Phobos 2 is a way to rethink that and do it in a more modern and well, basically ways we've learned how to use D better over time. A major focus of Stephen's work is to have Phobos and Phobos 2 coexist peacefully with each other, which should pretty much eliminate the upgrade problem. The idea is you can mix and match using Phobos and Phobos 2 without causing problems. And I think that'll make it much more attractive to gradually move into using Phobos 2. It won't break existing code. So we have a lot of high hopes for that. Another thing, I'm not sure if Mike has put the proposal out yet, but there's a dip on perfect forwarding to add to D, and that should put us on a par with C++ with their ideas about perfect forwarding. That's also been a significant lack. One of the things I've tried to do in the last year, but have failed, is simplifying the language by removing features that no longer mean a whole lot anymore. But every time I try that, somebody comes up and says, I built my whole life on this one feature. And so it's hard to remove things from the language. Like one of my recent efforts was to remove lazy from the language because it's redundant with various uses of delegates. And I felt that the delegate feature could completely replace lazy, but I ran into resistance on that as well, which is frustrating.
Anything to
I
add?
think D has too many features, and it's time, and a bunch of them are really, didn't pan out or been supplanted by better or later features, and it'd be nice to do some pruning, shall we call it that. And lazy is one of the things I thought we could prune and get rid of. Other things I'd like to do, as I've mentioned before, is de-emphasize exception handling. I'd like to make Phobos work just as well, but not rely on exceptions. I don't know if we can attain that goal, but I'd like to get there. Another thing I'd like for Phobos 2 is for it to be a so-called header-only library, where you don't have to link with anything. You just import those modules and you can use the code from it. This has been an enormous success in C++ to having header-only libraries, and I don't see any particular reason why we can't do it that way too. It solves a lot of annoying problems when you can include a library as just header-only. Well, for one thing, you can select which switches and have it apply to the library too, instead of being stuck with whatever the switches the binary of the library was compiled with. I just think it's pretty cool. So those are just a few items on the agenda for next year. I'd like to see a lot of progress on it in next year.
So it's hard for me to answer what's going to come down the pipe because I don't know, and neither does anyone else. I don't want to spoil my talk tomorrow by saying, you know, what I want to be coming down the pipe, because I'm going to mention that. But so one thing is what I want to happen. Another thing entirely is what's going to happen. And besides that, I also don't know what the community is going to do. Maybe some great work is done by someone with ideas that have nothing to do with me and Walter are with regard to the language, and you know, we never saw that coming, and maybe it gets in. So it's really hard to predict the future, so I'm not going to try to. And what Walter said, though, I want to say that I'm not sure header-only libraries were a great success, C++. The only reason they exist is because it doesn't have a package manager, and nobody wants to know how to build your code. Also, we have header-only libraries right now. All you have to do is, well, all you have to do is have a source library target type for a dub package, and there you go. I think some of the issues we have, though, is with Phobos. In the past, because of version switches and stuff like that, we've had linking problems because we distribute Phobos in binary form. And then if somebody compiled their code with a different set of switches than the binary form that they have, they'd get linker errors. So that could bypass that. But then we could talk about maybe different ways of distributing Phobos.
Okay, this is related to somebody mentioned when you mentioned Phobos 2, Walter. Somebody, I guess, missed the first part. He asks, "What's the status of Phobos 2? Did anyone start working on it?" And yes, Steven Schweighofer is working on it, but I don't think we know what the status is right now. You'll have to ask Steve. But I want to move on to
Very early stages.
right, very early stages. So, what are your thoughts about design by contract?
I have Meyer's book on design by contract back in the 80s, and I read it and was very excited about design by contract. And I put it in the C++ compiler I was working on, and as far as I can tell, nobody ever used it, which was disappointing. But that's true of a number of features I put in the C++ compiler, and they didn't use it because it was non-standard. So I thought, oh, with D, I'll put it in, and since it'll be a standard part of D, people will use it. Well, that was true for a number of features that people ignored in C++, but for contract programming, well, people are using it. But I've been kind of disappointed in contract programming. When I use it myself, it didn't really seem to deliver what I was hoping it would. It's hard to justify using ins and outs rather than just using asserts. And so at one point, I floated the trial balloon idea of deprecating the input and output sections of a function, and that sort of brought out of the woodwork a whole bunch of people who were using it extensively and liked it. So naturally, it stays in. But I guess I'm not seeing any great way to extend it or make it more useful, because I don't know of a way to make it more useful. It kind of is what it is. But, you know, personally, if I was doing D over, I probably would have left the feature off. It's a rather complex and tricky to implement, and it's had a number of bugs in it which have resisted fixing, and that kind of plays into it too. It hasn't really caught on outside of D either, which to me also suggests that it's an idea that is just not pulling its weight. The asserts, on the other hand, which is the most basic contract, actually work out very well in D, and I'm very happy with them. It's just that the inputs and output sections just don't seem to, from my perspective, deliver enough to make them worthwhile. But that said, I know people use it and swear by it, and so it's going to stay in the language, but it's not my favorite feature.
Well, it hasn't had much success outside of the language in a certain way. it was proposed for C++20 and didn't make it because it wasn't considered to be ready yet to make it, but it will probably be in C++23. So I don't know if that's going to validate that or not. I like to say that I like contracts, but at the same time, you know, they're like comments. They're a failure. If you should be guaranteeing if there's a compile time, and then if you can't, then use contracts to try to guarantee that at runtime, and hope that your test suite has enough coverage that it will trigger things that shouldn't be happening. Other than that, what Walter said, basically they're assertions for the most part, but I do like the fact that they're a little bit separated, especially with the new shorter syntax. And there's also a question of people being able to turn them off. There's a semantic difference between saying this is an in contract and just some random assertion, I think, that makes it more useful, but not that much more.
Well, C++ contract programming has been proposed multiple times over the last couple decades. And I'm kind of wondering what's different this time that it got more traction with C++.
I don't know. I do know that one of the problems they had was whether or not it should apply to const-expr. And my reaction was, why wouldn't they? And I immediately fired up an editor and did it in D just in case, to see what would happen to CTFE. And of course, it just worked as expected.
Okay, what are the practical parallelism limits of a dependency-driven, fiber-based front end?
Oh, brother. I've definitely thought about that. And the compiler or the language is designed so you can have multiple threads working on it at the same time. But the problem is it seems kind of pointless because with make, you can do a multi-threaded make if you're using separate compilation, and you're multi-threading and you're getting the multi-threading without doing any work, and you get it and it speeds up compilation. And so it's just hard to kind of justify trying to refactor the front end to be multi-threaded.
Well, Walter said, I mean, if your code is big enough that threads would help, then put it in different modules, and there you go. Why is your module ginormous?
Now, there are some downsides. The lexing pass is independent of the parse step. It's conceptually independent. But it turns out if you actually make them independent, then you have to store all the tokens after you lex it. Right now, the parser consumes tokens just as fast as the lexer is creating them. So although they are independent, if the parser is able to consume them as fast as the lexer can produce them, you don't have to store them anywhere. But now if you make it multi-threaded, now you have to construct a pipeline of tokens, which is going to cost you memory and time. And I can't escape the feeling that you're going to lose as much as you gain with that. Another problem is I looked into, if you import 100 modules to have 100 threads, lex them independently. The difficulty with that is the lexer stores all the identifiers in a common table or in a common associative array. So every unique identifier in your program is stored exactly once, which makes for a lot of convenience because you can compare if two identifiers are identical simply by comparing the pointer to the identifier, which greatly speeds up the symbol table, reduces memory consumption, all those goodies. But now if you're lexing them in independent threads, you need to have synchronization on building the identifier table. And it just seems to me that the synchronization would destroy the value of, would cost so much time that you really wouldn't see much of any gains in lexing speed. The same goes with the string table. The string table is common among all the all the modules being compiled. And so you can't make the threads independent of each other, even though they are conceptually independent of each other. For performance reasons, having them synchronize with each other is going to be needed. So another thing is, long ago, I fixed the file I/O so that reading files was independent, because that was one thing where there didn't need to be any communication. You just read the file and put it in a buffer. And when you list a whole bunch of files on the command line, would start a thread for each of those in order to read the files, and the files were all read concurrently. And testing after testing showed it simply did not speed things up. Especially, and the reason it doesn't is because the memory disk caches and SSD drives have just destroyed the performance problem with file I/O. So there was no gain with this. And finally, somebody submitted a pull request to just disable the asynchronous file I/O. You can still find traces of it in the source code, but it turned out to, I did some experiments, and if you had your source file sitting off on a network or on a floppy disk, it would actually speed things up. But nobody compiles off of a floppy disk anymore. Although you could argue people argue with their pulling the source code over a network. But, so my experience with that kind of dissuaded me from trying to make the compiler more concurrent. And since, -J on make gives you a concurrent compile anyway, it just seemed like a waste of time to work on that.
Or better yet, don't do anything with Ninja. It'll use all your cores, because it's silly to actually request -J to specify the number of cores. Just use all of them.
Okay, here's a question for Walter. At work, we use various compilers that have watch mode and recompile only the parts of the source code that have changed. For example, function level granularity, not just separate compilation. For example, code compile for one of our mobile app projects takes 3 to 4 minutes, but hot reload on the device takes less than a second. What are your thoughts about adding such functionality to DMD?
Well, I have a boring anecdote about that. Back when I worked at Symantec, Uplink was our linker, and I know that Uplink is everyone's favorite linker in DLand.
Yay, Uplink!
But at the time, the guy who wrote it, Steve Russell, that's all he did was write that linker, and it was the fastest linker in the world by far. And he made a lot of money selling that because it was completely compatible with Microsoft Linker, only it ran several times faster. And everybody bought that. Microsoft, in an attempt to speed up their linker, introduced incremental linking, where if you just change one object file, it could link it by, instead of regenerating the whole executable, it would just patch the executable. And the amusing thing about it is oftentimes it produced a corrupt executable, which would just crash. And then the workaround was, go do a full link and it will fix it. But that's just illustrates one of the problems with doing things incrementally. But the real issue is we had this big meeting at Symantec where they said, well, Microsoft has an incremental linker to speed up linking. We need to do incremental linking to speed up linking too. And some of us ran some experiments and pointed out that Uplink could do a full link faster, much faster than Microsoft Linker could do an incremental link. So really the problem was not that we didn't have incremental linking. We were just doing a bad job of marketing the fact that how fast our linker was. So that's always kind of filtered into my distaste for incremental compilation is the bird flew into my window. That's the first time that happened. I lost my train of thought here. Your first problem is trying to do an incremental compilation without introducing a long list of subtle bugs because you didn't update the data structures correctly. And then the second problem is well, if you're going to do it incrementally, you're going to have to store information about the state of the compiler in various positions in the code, and you have to save that state somewhere. And the act of saving that state and then reloading it, to me, is likely slower than just simply concentrating on making the full compile fast. And so that's what I've done with DMD, is the concentration was on making the language easy to write a fast compiler for and to make the compiler itself as fast as I could. And then first off, you'll get correct compiles without all those bugs. And second of all, it's going to be fast without having to do all that work to write an incremental compiler. So that's been my focus. Just make the compilation fast and you don't need incremental compilation.
I think it'd be awesome, but I have no idea how you retrofit that onto the existing code base, and especially without introducing bugs. I think from a practical point of view, I just don't see how, and that's assuming that the incremental stuff will be faster, but there's only one way to know, and I just don't see how that could be done properly without writing the front end from scratch, which I'm pretty sure nobody wants to do.
Well, on something related, I did pre-compiled headers for the C++ compiler, and how that was implemented was the symbol table was rolled out onto the disk as a memory map file. And it took me some months to implement that, and then I spent the next 2 years fixing bugs in that. And it was always, everything works if you don't use pre-compiled headers. If you use pre-compiled headers, you get this weird problem. And it left really a sour taste in my mouth that is the wrong design. Trying to roll your data structures in and out of files is a very difficult thing to do right if you want to make it fast. To make it fast, it didn't serialize the data structures. The files actually reflected the memory layout of the structure, and then what I would do is, writing the files out, I would readjust the pointers so they were relative to the start of the file. Okay, and then when I would read the memory map file back in, I would add an offset to all the pointers as to where they actually were in memory. And this was a great scheme. It was fast, but there was always the issue of when you have self-referential data structures, have you added the offset to the pointer yet or not? And you didn't want to add the offset twice, and you didn't want to defensively just add all the offsets, because then you had to read the whole memory map file in, and you wanted to only read in the parts you were actually referring to. So the end result was, I learned a lot writing this, but it was really a buggy experience of mine, and not something I care to repeat doing, because you can lose an awful lot of time into making this work. And I don't see the payback isn't guaranteed over just simply working on making it fast.
Okay, I'm going to have to interrupt for the flow of things for just a second. I forgot to mention, I don't want to mispronounce your name. Is it Petar or Peter Kirov? I believe you have my email address. I know I'm pretty sure I have yours. So you can email me or directly, or dling.org@gmail.com, because I forgot to tell you, you have a D-Rocket mug with your name on it. Well, not literally, but it's going to be yours. I'll just need to get your information. And I should also mention that everyone asking questions in this Ask Us Anything right now, I am putting your name in the magic standard.range.uniform program that I have to win the opportunity to select any item from our D-Link Swag Emporium. T-shirt, mug, sticker, sweatshirt, whatever it is you want, you pick one and it's yours. And that's going to be the prize for this round. And so for our next question, I believe comes from Snarwin. Currently, I'm sorry, Simon N. I skipped right over yours here. What's the state about proto-object? How does proto-object behave with interfaces? For example, can one specify that an interface shall or shall not support opcomp? Is anyone aware? Are you guys aware of the state of proto-object?
No, is anybody working on it?
I'm not working on it.
Yeah,
I'm not working on it either.
Yeah, I know that was Andre's thing, and I believe it was it Razvan or
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Eddie, one of them. So nobody knows about proto-object, and so here's something for my to-do list, I guess, to figure out what's going on with proto-object. If anybody's in the chat who wants to speak up, who's in the know about the current state of proto-object, please don't be shy. Let us know. All right, next question comes from Snarwin. Currently, D is a language with a number of distinct subsets. The @safe subset, the DIP1000 compliant subset, the better C subset, the subset allowed in CTFE, etc. Trying to write generic code that fits into 2 or more of these subsets is often quite painful. With the introduction of @live, it will only get worse. Do you have any plans to address this?
Well, first off, DIP1000 is part of the language now. It isn't a subset. It was the switch was put in there to so people could try it out to see if it was working. But experience has shown that DIP1000 is actually working very well, and I would expect non-DIP1000 code to be deprecated. So you should stop doing. You should not write a subset that doesn't use DIP1000.
I'm confused because DIP1000 just allows you to write more safe code, so I don't see how that's a subset of a subset. It actually increases what could be put into safe, and right now you don't have to write safe code either. I'm also confused why you'd have to somehow write code that works in CTFE or not. And also, if you don't do these things correctly, the compiler will let you know, so it's not like it will fail at runtime.
Yeah, the only real subset there is the better C subset. The rest is all part of the language. I mean, you can mix and match safe code and non-safe code with pretty much with abandon, however you want. You're not you don't have to decide which one you're going to do.
Well, especially if your code in particular system, you can call all of it anything that's valid CTFE. It'll be fine. If it's safe libraries you're using, that'll be fine as well. I don't see how you'd be limiting yourself.
Yeah, it's like I think we just discussed earlier today. You can do OOP style programming, or you can do functional style programming, or you can do both, and they don't interfere with each other. So you don't have to decide you're going to use this subset, which prevents you from using another subset.
And even if somebody writes a Barrett C library, again, you don't have to write Barrett C code to use it. I mean, if that works in Barrett C, it will work with whatever it is you're trying to do yourself.
Okay, I'm trying to follow. I'm not sure if this is a conversation, if these questions in here are directed at you guys. Ethan was talking about incremental linking.
Incremental linking is not a language feature. That's a linker feature.
Right. No, I'm not saying he was asking you. I think it's part of a discussion going on here. I'm trying to follow it. Here's one from Steve. Is there a plan to document DIP1000?
I thought it was documented. If not that well, we better have a plan to document it. One thing I started doing a couple of years ago was I just pick a random page in the spec and go through it, comparing the description with the implementation and fixing it. And I made a bunch of PRs from that, but the effort kind of petered out because it would take months to pull the PRs, and I just kind of lost focus on it and went on to other things. But that's something I should probably start up doing again, is just go section by section through the spec and improve it. I did notice at the time that a number of sections, the older ones in the spec, are written in a kind of a juvenile manner, which is really not the right tone we want to take anymore. And those things pretty strongly need to be upgraded with a more proper approach to the prose than that. It's kind of, some of it's kind of juvenile, kind of sloppy. It's just not where we should be with specification. Specification should be, dry and thorough and complete, and should avoid clever things or clever ways of saying things and jokes and things like that. All that stuff should be removed from the spec. A tutorial and a spec are two entirely different styles of writing.
Okay, and I can add something. Steve expanded on his question there. He's saying that the dip is marked superseded, and the reason that it's marked superseded is because the implementation got ahead of the of the dip, and that was sitting there for a long time before I even came in as dip manager. And I asked Walter. He informed me. Well, actually, I think it was DiceBot who informed me that dip 1000 had no relationship to the implementation anymore. And I asked Walter at one of the DConfs what he wanted to do about it, and he said he was going to think about rewriting it to update it, but then he decided not to, and just to go ahead and do the documentation. So that's why I marked it as superseded rather than accepted, because it's out of
I don't
sync.
think it's in the spec though. And
Yeah.
definitely what's in the dip itself is not what's being implemented, because I know, because I read it and then I wrote the code and it didn't work. I know how it works now, but through trial and error. Yeah, we need to fix that.
I'm not sure what the state of it is in the spec. If it's not up to
I
date
don't
and
think
correct, it's not in the spec at all.
I don't think so. I'm not going to bet on it, but I don't think so.
Well, that's on me then.
No, that needs to get fixed.
Okay, yeah, well, there's a problem.
All right. So we all know what to do over the coming months to prod Walter in the forums. All right. And Matthias is asking, is there a plan to enable DIP 1000 by default?
Yes,
Specifically, he
but I
wants a
don't know.
timeline.
We could do it now, but I suppose that would be inappropriate to do that before the spec is complete. It's fixed on it.
I think we need to turn on warnings for. I think we need to change the compiler first to emit like the equivalent deprecation warnings for everything that has a preview switch right now, so that then people have an incentive to change it and we'll know what's going on, so that we can switch preview to revert. But then when we switch it, they should get some sort of messages first so they can migrate, because it's been long enough. I think with DIP 1000, it's hard to break anything, but I don't know if that would happen or not. I mean, it only expands what you can do. So, but I think importantly, we need to have a transition plan from preview to revert, including deprecation messages for I don't know how long, but some sort of time period, and then basically go through all of them and switch preview to revert after they've paid their dues and shown that they're useful. Like DIP 1000 is definitely such a case, and go through each one of them, because we don't want to have these preview switches on forever. Don't even want to have revert on forever. And yeah, it's been long enough. We need to work on that.
Yeah, but sort of on a more meta level, DIP 1000 didn't get a lot of traction when I first started working on it, but I'm very pleased that it has. I think it's delivered on what it promised to do. and it's a good solid feature now.
Well, Matthias brings up the point here that many libraries do not work with it, and he gives the example as vibd does not compile with DIP 1000 right now.
Does it use scope everywhere? I'd have to look at it later, but I do want to know why.
Well,
maybe it uses in everywhere.
If you take the address of a stack variable and pass it to a function that doesn't label the parameter as scope, well, it's not going to compile without DIP1 or with DIP 1000.
Yeah, but only in safe code, and vibe.d definitely isn't safe.
Yeah, well, without seeing what the issues are with that, I can't really.
Yeah, me neither. I'd have to look into it, but well, it's good that Matthias knows what's going on, so that at least we know what the problem areas are, or at least some of them anyway.
And they
So
may
I can try to
actually
fix that ahead of time.
They may be late bugs in the vibe. Who knows?
Quite possibly.
Okay, this next question, I can answer this one myself. There was a sponsored position to help review GitHub pull requests. Has it been a success? Yes, it has. The announcement is coming sometime after the conference. We want to hold off before we announce who's getting the position. We actually have 2 people taking the position. We offered it originally one person at 50,000 a year, and 2 people to split that. And this is sponsored by Symmetry Investments, for which we're all very grateful. And they have selected 2 candidates to fill that role. One of them will act as kind of a manager position, and the other one will act as a technical position, something like that. So we're going to be asking the community before we make the announcement. We want to define specifically the roles for each person. What are their responsibilities? And so sometime in the next week or so, I will be putting that up on the forums, asking for feedback. How do we define specifically the responsibilities for these 2 positions? And once we've established that and we know what's going on, we're going to go ahead and make the announcement. But they won't be starting the position until, I believe, in early January. But yeah, we do have 2 people. They're going to be the pull request and issue managers, and they're going to be paid to keep our pipeline clean. Okay, and let me see. Does DMD have any architectural issues which preclude compilation of legal D? If so, which of these would not be resolved by a dependency-driven front end?
Well, there are many architectural issues in DMD, but I don't know of any that prevent it from compiling legal D correctly. So I'm not really understanding where this is coming from.
Can you clarify, Bruce, maybe a little bit? And while we're waiting on him to clarify, we have a question here. Does D support OpenGL? Yes, D supports any C library. You can bind to it directly. Is there any hope for the sent and usent types to be implemented soon?
Oh, the main issue is what to do about 32-bit code generation. Because to store a sent, you'd need 4 registers to do that, and the backend just isn't set up to handle a 4-register type. One possibility is to not use the code generator at all for it, to do like complex numbers are done, make it a library type for 32-bit compilation. So that's a possibility. In fact, implementing the whole thing as a library type may at least work out, at least to get something usable that way.
Okay, and we have something. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
I guess that's because there hasn't seemed to be really a big demand for it.
Okay, and Bruce gave some. Sure, as can Stefan. Look to dependency nesting. Okay, so back to the question: does DMD have any architectural issues which preclude compilation of legal D? If so, which of these would not be resolved by a dependency-driven front end? And you're saying look to dependency nesting.
I don't understand.
Okay, Stefan
And even
is.
if I did, I'd ask what would be solved by that kind of thing. I don't know what I don't know what problems would be solved by this that we have right now. I also don't understand the question.
Okay, so Stefan's given an example here. Static if cannot be properly resolved in some cases because the dependency on deferred nodes is not expressible in how DMD tracks dependencies.
I don't know why it's not expressible. The compiler internally does know the dependencies. It may botch up evaluating it, but it knows everything a declaration is dependent on. So I don't, again, I'm just not understanding the architectural issue. You know, problems come up when you have circular references, but you know, the compiler usually detects those and gives you a nasty message if it can't resolve it. Some things are just unresolvable. Like if you have a static if inside of a struct, that changes the size of the struct, and the static if is testing the size of the struct. You know, that's a circular reference, and that should fail if you try to build such a thing. Beyond that, I guess I'm not really understanding the problem.
Okay, I think I'm getting.
Yeah, but that's fundamental, right? I mean, if a static if can add a member and then you're testing the size of the struct, then is there any architectural change that could fix that? I mean, that's a fundamental problem, isn't it?
I don't want to fix that. I want that to fail, not have some pick some arbitrary resolution for that. No, the static if it doesn't always produce the same result, should fail to compile.
I guess there's another example on this point. The fact that DMD does on-demand semantic analysis is what causes a lot of weirdness in the first place, so-called compile time race conditions.
Well, all race conditions in the compile time stuff should be a compiler error. As I mentioned before, static if should always produce the same result. And
I guess if it's not compile error right now, then file a bug, right?
Yeah. And I don't think there's a general solution. It's just something, if you find an error in it, to file a bug report, and we'll try to, stamp that one out. I know we fixed a lot of bugs over the years with that, which, and the compiler's gotten a lot better about dealing with it, but the compiler was never re-architected all.
All right, I think I got all of the big questions there. We've got a couple of questions that other people are answering about OpenGL support and stuff like that. All right, guys, got any more questions for Walter and Átila, or I guess me, about the dips? It'll help if you do an @ the D Language Foundation so I can see it. I didn't realize YouTube supported that. Should have been the first thing I
There's
tried.
one there about deep performance compared to modern C++ 20, and the answer is there shouldn't be any difference.
You're talking runtime performance, right?
I was expecting that's what they meant.
Okay, because sometimes they mean compile time, sometimes runtime. Yeah, there shouldn't be any difference between C++ and D and runtime performance, except in some cases, D is able to generate better code because it has more semantic information available to it than a C++ compiler does. For example, immutable. The optimizer in D can take advantage of something being immutable, whereas you can't in C++ because Constant C++ is more of a documentation thing than an actual semantic thing.
Okay, and we have an example posted here of a bug where static if does not always give the same answer. Issue number 19458.
All right, well, there you go. It's posted on Bugzilla. That's good.
That's where it belongs.
That's where it belongs, yeah.
Is D another DSL language?
No.
No.
I don't think so. It's a general purpose language, not a domain specific language.
It's the opposite of a DSL. It's huge and has lots of features.
Come on, guys, this is your chance.
Yeah, you get to throw things at me.
Us.
I've got my hockey mask on, you know.
Hey, Átila, DConf is next door, man.
Yeah, I think Átila wandered into the wrong chat room here.
There's nobody at the DConf chat, obviously, because everybody's at.
Everybody's here.
I was going to give you hell about it, Átila, but then I realized it is actually evening for you.
It is. It's nearly 8 p.m. and also I'm in my own home, so I'll do whatever the hell I want.
Okay, we got a couple more questions coming in here. What do you think of the Crystal language?
I know next to nothing about it.
Isn't that the Ruby-like one? That's all I know.
Oh my God, we mentioned DConf and Ethan's coming out of the woodwork here. Here's another question. What hobby projects are you, Walter and Átila, currently working on outside of D-Lang repositories?
As if I have time for hobbies. I wish. Basically, all my hobby projects would be D-related anyway, and the stuff I would like to be working on, I have a slide for that tomorrow.
Well, I keep being sorely tempted to fix the computer strategy in the Empire game to use a neural network. I struggled for many years to come up with a successful computer strategy for it. And after, reading some stuff about neural networks and how they worked, I realized I was well on my way of reinventing neural networks without having any idea what it actually was. And I thought, boy, these days I could make a computer strategy that's really effective if I trained it with a neural network. So, and it's really hard to not work on that. I don't work on it because it would be useless, although it would be a lot of fun.
Okay.
So it's hard not to do that.
I think another way to answer that hobby thing is that the good news for me, I'm lucky enough that my hobby projects became what I get paid to do. Unfortunately for me, my hobby projects are what I got paid to do, so.
So yeah, I think about that, and I work on some toy programs now and then, like my text editor. I fixed a bug in it yesterday. There's no reason to have my own custom text editor. I just enjoy working on it, frankly.
Okay, Ethan says they expect to see your beer in DConf later, Átila. And Ali asks, Ali asks for a comment on GC and performance, please.
Well, you can write performant code with the GC. And I've done that. And the trick is you never run the collector. You just allocate.
Even better, don't allocate.
Yep. Yeah, the fastest form of allocation is to design your algorithm so you don't need to allocate. Also, stack allocation comes for free, so.
Nearly free, one instruction, but yeah.
Yeah. And not only is it for free, it's hot in the cache. So always try to get things allocated on the stack as much as possible. Then you get RAII for free without even exception handling.
When does DMC get updated to a recent DMD?
EMC?
DMC. Are you going to rewrite
Oh.
DMC in D?
Oh, I already did. It's on
So,
GitHub.
Okay, so yeah, I guess that's what he's asking is when does it get updated to a recent DMD? I guess it doesn't compile with the latest DMD.
I haven't tried it with the latest DMD, but the backend is shared with DMD, so of course, that part is compiled with the latest DMD.
When did you?
I upgrade the DMD compiler when I decide I want to use one of the newer features of D.
When did you rewrite DMC in D?
I think about a year ago.
Oh, I don't remember hearing about it. That's interesting. Okay.
He's been talking about it with Barry C and how he managed to convert it, like, piecemeal.
Oh well, I saw him talking about.
It was the motivator to get better C working properly.
Oh, okay. Did you mention it in your Munich talk?
I don't remember.
Yeah, I don't either. I just don't remember. I remember you talking about make. All right, there was another question here. Okay, the question about Crystal earlier. He says, yeah, Crystal has Ruby syntax, but compiles and runs fast. Is Crystal a competitor?
I have no idea.
Dunno.
Mainly other languages developed by big tech companies that drive their improvements. How do you see D and the D community could deal with that? How could big projects in D appear? How can we get more big projects in D?
By being the best we can be.
Yeah, making the language so enticing that people have no other choice but to. I mean, this is like if we knew the secret to that, then this conference would be a lot larger. The thing is, this is hard. It's like, how do you start a company that ends up being a unicorn? I wish I knew. It's a hard problem to solve. But like Walter said, let's be the best we can be, and it's enough.
One thing I find very satisfying about D is we have companies making a lot of money because they are using D. I mean, that's the best kind of validation is people are using it. They're using it productively. They're making money with it. It's their secret weapon. All those are, great things about D, things we want to encourage.
Okay, now I originally envisioned this to be 1 hour, and we have just about hit 1 hour, and we got 15 minutes until Matthew's talk. But if you guys can stick around 10 more minutes, we can do 10 more minutes of this if you want to.
Yeah, I can stick around. I have to leave soon, but that will depend on people actually, pressing my doorbell, and they haven't yet. So.
Okay, cool. And Walter is a permanent fixture today, so I don't think he's going anywhere. What metaprogramming code expansion factor do you experience in your day-to-day D programming? Mix-in expansion, template expansion, static for each expansion, etc.
What's an expansion factor in this context?
Yeah,
how big the resulting code is?
Yeah, we're gonna need more. We're gonna need more clarity there, Bruce.
Because if that is the amount of code that the compiler writes for me, my goal is always loads.
Well, I'm still a modest user of templates, but old habits die hard. Sometimes I'm surprised at people who write code that is nothing but templates, and I just am not in that mindset.
Present.
Yeah, Átila, I was thinking about you.
I can't write C++ or D without using templates. Like it just doesn't happen.
Okay, expansion factor. Expansion factor is what the human would have had to type.
Right, so that's what I thought it was. Again, I strive for loads. The most the compiler can write for me, the less I have to write myself, therefore win.
Huh. Well,
But I wouldn't know because I didn't measure. Like even with string mixins, I'd have to print the code out. I usually don't, so I don't know what the answer is. But hopefully, the biggest factor I can manage, so I don't have to write any code.
well, one recent change is in the back end. I wrote most of the back end like 30 years ago, and I re-implemented or reinvented the wheel over and over and over again in it. And recently, basically reinvented creating dynamic arrays again and again and again and again. And recently, I did a series of pull requests to replace them all with a B array, and you can see that in barray.d, and just do a search for where B array appears in the code. And I found a lot of places where I was reinventing the wheel there. And it was a great pleasure to delete all that crap and replace it with B arrays. And B array incorporates all the good stuff that I had in those custom implementations and brought it all up to a uniform standard. Instead of some of the array implementations were better than others, now they're all good. They're all the best implementation. For example, each of them would have their own reallocation and resizing strategy. But with B arrays, it uses the best of all of the reallocation strategies. And so, it's a little thing, but it was very pleasing to do that, to rip all that code out and replace all those arrays with B arrays.
Okay, this question is for me. Mike, has the new dip review rule set division into separate review and feedback threads worked well in your opinion? Absolutely. For me, I mean, I spent, it's hard to quantify, but I spent a lot of time at the end of each review trying to summarize the review to put it in the review summary in the dip, because before those review threads would become just, they'd go in all different directions, and people would mix genuine dip feedback with, discussion of all kinds of other stuff, and I had to poke through every post to find what was relevant, and it was really time consuming for those really, really long threads, which is basically any dip that Walter proposes. Um, so it was a pain. And so now that I've separated it and I've been very strict about the feedback threads, it makes the review summary so much easier. So if it's easy for me, it's also going to be easy for people coming in the future when they're reading the dip and they get down to the review summary and I have a link to the discussion thread and the feedback thread. They can click on the feedback thread and get the feedback as it was written. And if they want to wade into the discussion, they can wade into the discussion. But that way we separate what's wrong with the dip structurally, content-wise, and then what does everybody think about the dip? And I think that's worked really well. And I guess Manu and Stefan's dip about the unary, the new operator they proposed for template expansion, I actually was away from the thread for a few days, and the feedback thread started to get out of hand. I mean, it was borderline if they were going to be deleted or not. But I got to stay on top of those things so that they don't get out of hand. It just makes everything easier to follow.
Well, I know we put so much work on Mike. I'm in favor of anything that reduces his workload and makes him more efficient.
Yay! That's why I want to hurry up and hire my assistant. So he's coming soon. Where is? Oh, sorry, I just skipped one here. Out of the core repositories hosted under the DLang organization, which one needs the most attention at the moment?
Boy, all of them.
I missed the what?
Out of the core repositories hosted under the DLang organization, which one needs the most attention at the moment?
Yeah, what Walter said.
Hard to pick
There's
one.
no lack of work. There's no lack of work.
Yeah, everywhere you look, there's work that needs to be done. It's just a matter of what you feel like working on today.
Yeah.
Like we were talking about the spec. The spec needs work. Phobos needs Phobos too. DMD, lots of issues in it. I don't even want to count the number of issues in Bugzilla on there. So, there's no shortage of work for anyone who wants to pitch in and help.
Okay, where is D visible to potential users who aren't already aware of it, who don't visit the websites? I would say Reddit.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. It's on Reddit all the time.
Yeah.
Also, it shows up on Hacker News now and then.
Yeah.
One thing you can do is, when it's appropriate and not spamming, to feel free to bring it up. I mean,
Right.
like,
Blog post.
Word of mouth. I
well,
mean,
it's
that's
what Rust does. You can have a topic of any language on Hacker News or Reddit, and somebody always makes it about Rust. So to me, that's kind of open season on that. That feel free to bring up D if it's applicable and not spam
and
if it's of interest to the readers of the thread.
I haven't been writing blog posts as often as I used to, and I haven't been recruiting guest posts because I don't have enough time for it to get in the right mindset to write those posts that I need to be in, and I need to get back on that. And one of the things when we hire an assistant for me, I wanted one of the requirements I wanted is somebody who's familiar enough with the language that they can go out on the Reddit threads and do what I'm not doing because I don't evangelize in the Reddit threads because I'm not. Uh, I'm not Steve Klebinik, let's put it that way. And I'm hoping to get somebody, more well versed in in the language than I am to be able to do that. I evangelize where I can, but that's what we need. We need people out there evangelizing on the Reddit thread when we share blog posts on Reddit and when people mention D in other threads or when we have an opportunity to mention it. So word of mouth is the only way we're going to do it.
I do it
And
all the time when Hacker News and stuff like that, but there's only so much, and also I don't want to overdo it because or else
Spam.
Yeah.
Well, another thing you can do is if you have Twitter accounts and if you have followers, is just talk about your what's going on in your use of D. Like, oh, I solved this neat problem in my D project, blah blah blah, or here's a great pull request I made, and just sort of mention it now and then. I mean, that's what people do with their programming. Why not?
Mm.
Okay, we are running short on time. Matthias Lang is coming up next. He's going to have to join the chat in a minute or two. And until he does, we can try to get another question or two in. We've got one right here. I'm a PhD student who proposed and oversees the student's project Mir versus NumPy multigrid. It's on the forum right now. I think we read about that the other day, the thread going on there. Are there any other good projects you can think of preferably performance oriented? So you're talking about projects for comparison, performance comparisons? Mir versus NumPy. So what other projects can we compare?
There's the regex,
Okay.
regular expression thing that ours is very, very fast, written by Dimitri.
Yeah, I'm not sure it'd still be the top in the world right now though, because Rust has a macro-based one, which basically does the same thing. So I think it'd be even Stevens or who knows. But yeah, that's a good example. Also, C++, I forgot compile time regular expression thing. The woman who wrote it did a lot of talks about it too. I haven't looked into it, but it exists now. I don't know. It depends on what people are interested in because they only care about performance when it's something they actually want to do fast and they can't get to do fast enough. It's hard to do.
All
I
right.
mean, the first blog post I wrote was about MQTT, and that was faster than nearly everything.
All right. Matthias has arrived, but here's a quick yes/no questions. Do you have any available slides to show D in a lecture seminar? I guess he's asking for slides he could borrow.
You can borrow any of mine.
I've done talks before. I'd have to go look at what they are. I did the talk in the university a few years ago called YD. I probably have it somewhere.
And I have a beginner-oriented slide set that I used at a meetup here for people who are actually too low level to they only knew JavaScript, so they didn't even. I was assuming an audience that knew C, but yeah, I've got some slides on Google. I think they're still there. So anyway, yeah, if you contact me, I can share the slides with you, and you feel free to use them. All right, very quickly, let me run my magic standard.uniform program.